Hi, this is Ms. Hammonds. This is a presentation of lecture AP Biology 1, Bio 2113. In this presentation, we're going to cover Chapter 1, which is an introduction to the human body. I did provide guided notes to support this presentation. Please make sure that you have those available for you to support you in taking notes. So let's begin. So anatomy is the study of the structures of the body. It can also be defined as the scientific study of the body structures. Some of these structures are very small and can only be observed and analyzed with the assistance of microscopes. Other structures within the body are larger and can readily be seen, manipulated, measured, or weighed. The word anatomy comes from the Greek word meaning to cut apart. With anatomy, we also have some additional divisions or topics. One of those is gross anatomy, which is the study of larger structures of the body. Gross anatomy are those structures that we can view without the aid of a magnification. The prefix macro means large, thus gross anatomy can also be referred to as macroscopic anatomy. Within gross anatomy, we would also have some additional divisions. There are three additional ones that I'll refer to as some subdivisions of gross anatomy. The first is regional anatomy. That is the study of the interrelationships of all structures in a specific body region. An example would be your abdomen. The study of the regional anatomy helps us understand more of a relationship between structures such as muscles, nerves, blood vessels, and some other structures that work together to serve a particular region of the body. Another subdivision would be systemic anatomy. This is the study of structures that make up a discrete body system. The group of these structures will work together to perform unique body functions. One example would be the muscular system. In addition, we also have the surface anatomy. We also refer to this as the superficial anatomy or visual anatomy. This is also a division or a branch of gross anatomy that focuses on studying the external features of the body. Surface anatomy deals with anatomical structures that can be studied by sight without dissection. It is a descriptive science that deals with the surface landmarks that correspond with deeper structures that are hidden from view. Microscopic anatomy is the study of structures that can only be seen with the use of a microscope or some other magnification device. There are two divisions under microscopic anatomy. That is cytology, which is the study of cells, and histology, which is the study of tissues. We will explore each of these branches in more detail throughout this course. Also under microscopic anatomy is developmental anatomy. That is the study of the structures that change from one developmental level to another. For example, if you're studying an individual, you could study them from fertilization to adulthood. Embryology is another division under developmental anatomy. That is the branch of the developmental anatomy that studies prenatal development, such as gametes, fertilization, and the development of the embryos and fetuses. So now let's look at physiology. Physiology is the study of functions of those structures. So as we previously stated, anatomy is the study of the structure. Physiology is the function of those structures. Some examples as far as areas of study would be chemistry, physics. Specifically, we're looking at the way that these items work and support functions of life. Most of physiology focus centers on the body's tendency toward homeostasis, or how we're able to maintain our homeostasis within our body. The principle of complementarity states that anatomy and physiology are inseparable. Function reflects structure, and structure determines function. This would be number 3 on your guided notes. Please put a star or some type of indication. This is something that you definitely need to be familiar with. All of the notes are important for you to know, but this is one that I want you to make sure that you are familiar with. So next, let's look at the levels of organization, or the hierarchy of structural levels. The human body is organized into a hierarchy of structural levels, starting from the most microscopic to the macroscopic organism level. So you need to make sure that you are familiar with these levels and that you can list them from the smallest level to the largest. All right, the first of these levels is the chemical level. The chemical level includes the atoms and molecules. Some examples would be DNA and glucose. Chemicals combine to form and create our cells. The next level is the cellular level. Cell is the smallest independent functioning unit of any living organism. Examples would be muscle cells, nerve cells, blood cells. Next is the tissue level. Tissues are a group of many similar cells that work together to perform a specific function. Again, groups of cells are organized together to create tissues that perform a particular function. The next level is the organ level. Examples of organs would be the liver, the stomach, and the heart. An organ is an anatomical distinct structure of the body composed of 2 or more tissue types. Next, we have our organ system. An organ system is a group of organs that work together to perform major functions or meet physiological needs of the body. Some systems would be the digestive system, the cardiovascular system. And then finally, the organism. An organism is the living being that has cellular structure that can independently perform all of its physiological functions necessary for life. All right, so there are 4 main themes of physiology. First is that structure determines function. And what that means is complementarity. We just spoke about complementarity in that anatomy and physiology are inseparable. The neurophysiology is a study of the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves and how they work together to perform functions as complex and diverse as vision, movement, and thinking. So structure determines function. The group of those items are inseparable. You can't study the neurophysiology if you don't look at the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves as a group. Next, energy is required to maintain life. Energy is the fuel of your body. And so without energy, your internal functions will not be able to work. Your body would not be able to self-repair or maintain cell and body tissues. Also, the energy supports your external activities that enable you to interact with our physical world. Information follows between organ systems to coordinate function. This one looks at how our bodies are able to control and coordinate the functions that occur throughout our body. We're able to respond to internal and external stimuli. Our endocrine and nervous systems work together and regulate the flow of information between the brain and the rest of the body. And then finally, the organ systems maintain homeostasis. Your body wants to maintain a state of internal equilibrium that we refer to as homeostasis. Though organs throughout the body play a role in maintaining our homeostasis, again, our endocrine and nervous systems are both specifically and especially important in sustaining and regulating our homeostasis. So, what is homeostasis? It is the body's ability to maintain a relatively stable internal environment. Please put a star by this definition. The wording of it is very specific to our text, and so you want to make sure that you're familiar with that. Again, it is the dynamic state of equilibrium. So now let's take a moment and look at some of our necessary life functions. The list here includes organization, metabolism, responsiveness, movement, development, growth, and reproduction. Organization is associated with both our internal and external environments. Our body is able to maintain boundaries so that there's a distinction between the internal components and the external components of our body. Metabolism is associated with the production of energy, regulation of our homeostasis hormones, and chemical reactions that occur within the body. Our responsiveness is the ability to sense change and then react to it. The movement, both internal and external, is regulated by various substances that provide our ability to have locomotion. Development is the ongoing changes throughout life, such as the production of cells, the maintenance of our organs and organ systems. Growth would be the increase in size or the continued production of cells. And reproduction is going to be regulated both at a cellular level and an organism level. Mitosis and meiosis are some of the body systems that maintain our ability to grow and reproduce. And so then as we go on through the slides, it talks more specifically about each of those categories that I just went through. So organism, again, is a human body that consists of many cells that maintain distinct internal and external components. As we look at metabolism, I would like us to take a moment and look at two specific metabolic processes. We have catabolism and anabolism. Please make sure that you make a notation of these. Anabolism is the process by which larger, more complex substances are broken down into smaller molecules. Your body can assemble and utilize the energy, and then it can take those larger, more complex substances within your body and then break them down. One of the activities in the body that goes through this process would be the energy, which is when you eat. After we've digested those items, those molecules can be combined into smaller molecules. So anabolism, I don't know, I feel like I'm saying this backwards. I'm talking about anabolism and not catabolism. No worries. I'm on an energy deprivation. Let me restate. So catabolism is the process by which larger and more complex substances are broken down into smaller particles. Catabolism is referred to as a destructive metabolic process. I'm gonna get it out. It's a chemical process that occurs within the body in order to maintain life. With catabolism, it's the process, again, by which we break larger particles down into simpler molecules. An example of this process is when we eat. The food is broken down so that the body can use the parts to assemble the structures that we need in order to maintain life and produce energy that our body needs. Again, catabolism is referred to as a destructive metabolic process. Anabolism is the process whereby smaller, simpler molecules are combined and restructured to create larger, more complex substances. Your body can assemble these more complex structures by utilizing the energy within our body from the food that we've eaten, and then combining those smaller molecules to create larger molecules that the body needs. It is a constructive metabolic process. And so we're going to go ahead and move through these additional slides because I briefly spoke about them. These are the necessary life functions. All right, so maintaining homeostasis occurs within our body systems. As we look at the list of survival needs, things that our body needs in order to maintain life, we're going to briefly look through this list. The things, needed in appropriate amounts for necessary life. If we have too little or too much of any of these particular items, our homeostasis will become off and the ability to maintain life becomes challenged. So the items we're going to look at is nutrients, oxygen, water, normal body temperature, and an appropriate atmospheric pressure. So again, as we look at homeostasis, what happens when homeostatic conditions are out of balance? How does the body keep an internal condition at a relatively balanced state? Those mechanisms are controlled by either a negative feedback or a positive feedback. So these controlled mechanisms that help us maintain our homeostatic balance when the body becomes out of balance or off balance would be a negative and positive feedback. I realized I just kind of bypassed our survival needs. I'll just go through these quickly and briefly. All right, so nutrients. Nutrients are received through the body by us eating. They are broken down into smaller molecules that the body can convert and use for energy and allow us to build cells. Oxygen, again, is required for the breakdown of these nutrients and the harvesting of energy. Oxygen is removed from the air and transported into our bodies by our respiratory and cardiovascular systems. Water is the substance that we need to dissolve body chemicals. They provide transport for our waste, and water is also involved in maintaining our metabolic reactions. We can lose our water from the body from a process called evaporation or excretion. Normal body temperature must be 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, that is 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. These temperatures are ideal for humans. Some of us may have a slightly higher or slightly lower normal body temperature. And then our body temperature is what we use or how we produce heat for the generation of our skeletal muscle contractions. Appropriate atmospheric pressure must be kept at a certain range for our ability to breathe and conduct our cellular metabolic processes. Gases can only dissolve within a certain pressure range, and if we exceed that appropriate atmospheric pressure, the ability for our lungs to regulate their function becomes distorted. All right, we have already gone through here. So let me speak more specifically about negative and positive body feedbacks. Negative feedback is included in most homeostatic controls of all of the feedback mechanisms found within the body. The largest percentage of them are categorized as negative feedback mechanisms. Negative feedback is a response in reverse. It works in an opposite effect. The goal is to shut off the original stimulus and reduce its intensity. Negative feedbacks work like household thermostats. You set your thermostat to 70. If the temperature exceeds 70 in a cooling setting, the thermostat will come on and it will produce cooling air until the temperature goes back to 70. So again, a negative feedback is a reverse response. It works in opposition of the stimulus. It reduces the intensity, and it works similar to a household thermostat and a cooling or heating setting. Positive feedbacks actually increase the original stimuli. They push the variable further. And the body, some examples of occurrence of positive feedback would be blood clotting and childbirth. Again, positive feedback works with the stimuli. It's an enhancement or amplification rather than a reversing or opposition effect. It reinforces the stimulus or it increases the original stimulus. Examples of positive feedback, again, would be blood clotting when you're bleeding and childbirth. Specifically with childbirth, the brain stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called oxytocin or oxytocin. This hormone is transported to the uterus where it stimulates the uterine contraction and causes the baby to be pushed towards the cervix. Contractions will increase during childbirth until the baby is expelled, and those contractions will not stop until the baby is born. So that's an excellent and one of the very few positive feedback mechanisms that occurs within the body. So we've briefly talked about homeostasis. Now we're going to look at homeostatic control. How does the body maintain the homeostasis of the body and keep it in a stable, balanced equilibrium? So homeostatic control mechanism is broken into categories. Those three main categories are the receptors or sensory, the control center, and the effectors or the effector organs. The receptors of the body receive information that something in the environment has changed. It receives the information from the stimuli or the change variable. This causes an initial imbalance in our homeostasis. The control center, which may also be referred to as the integration, receives and processes the information from the receptor. Once that information is processed, the control center sends a signal out on the efferent pathway toward the effector organs. Those effector organs respond to the commands of the control center by either opposing or enhancing the stimulus. Excuse me, I'm so sorry if you heard me. So with the effectors, they're either going to produce a positive or a negative feedback from the information that received from the control center. And I did fail to mention that the receptors or the sensory organs transport their information to the control center on the afferent pathway. Afferent with an A. The control center sends its information to the effector organs on the efferent or E efferent pathway. All right, so let's take a moment and look at the anatomical position. If I failed to mention, please make sure that you put a star beside the information that discusses the positive and negative feedback mechanisms. Please make sure that you are familiar with which mechanism enhances the stimulus and which mechanism reverses or works in opposition of the mechanism. So the anatomical position is the position of the body when it's laying on the table for examination. Always refer to the anatomical position when you're identifying an item in the region or the surface anatomy of a body. Excuse me. In an anatomical position, the body is erect or standing upright with the face directed forward, arms by the side, and the palms of the hand are facing forward. The thumbs are going toward they're going away from the midsection of the body, is how I would describe it. The anatomical position is again used as a reference in describing the relation of body parts or body regions to one another. The book definition of the anatomical position states that the body is standing upright with the feet at shoulders width and parallel, toes forward, the limbs are held outside to each side, and the palms of the hands are facing forward. Always remember the left and right positioning. It's like a mirror reflection when you're talking about anatomical position. If you're facing a person and you raise your right hand is opposite of theirs. So your right hand is on their left side of their body. Your left hand is on the right side of their body. In addition to the anatomical position, we also look at directional terms. You may look at them as left, right, distal, proximal, superior, inferior, anterior, posterior. Anterior and posterior may also be referred to as ventral and dorsal. So anterior or ventral describes the front or towards the front of the body. An example would be the toes are anterior to the foot. The toes are anterior to the foot. Posterior, also referred to as dorsal, describes the back or towards the back of the body. An example would be the papillitis is posterior to the patella. The papillitis is posterior to the patella. Superior may also be referred to as cranial. Superior is also referred to as cranial. Superior describes a position above or higher than a part of the body. Describes a position above or higher than another part of the body. The eye orbits are superior to the oris. So the eye orbits or the sockets of the eye are superior to the oris or superior to the mouth. Inferior may also be referred to as caudal. Inferior describes a position below or lower than another part of the body. An example would be the pelvis is inferior to the abdomen. Again, inferior describes a position below or lower than another part of the body. Lateral describes the sides or direction toward the side of the body. Lateral refers to away from the midline. So the midline in the body is the center platform. Lateral describes a direction away from the midline. An example would be the pollex, or the thumb, is lateral to the digits in the anatomical position. Proximal describes the position in a limb that is nearer to the point of attachment or nearer to the body trunk. Again, proximal describes the position in a limb that is nearer to the point of attachment or nearer to the body trunk. An example would be the brachium. The brachium is the upper arm. The brachium is proximal to the antebrachium. The antebrachium is the forearm. Distal describes a position in a limb that is farther from the point of attachment or farther from the body trunk. An example would be the arm is distal to the femur. The arm is distal to the femur. The term superficial describes a position closer to the surface of the body. The term superficial describes a position closer to the surface of the body. An example would be the skin is superficial to bones. Deep describes a position farther from the surface of the body. Deep describes a position that is farther from the surface of the body. An example would be the brain is deep to the skull. Next, we have our anatomical planes. Please make sure that you are familiar with the surface area anatomy and anatomical planes of the body. The purpose of the anatomical planes is to help you in referencing the anatomical position and describing or identifying a plane in which the organ or body part is located. We specifically have 3 anatomical planes or 3 common body planes. Here is our sagittal plane. The sagittal planes divide the body or an organ vertically into right and left sides. If the vertical planes runs directly down the middle of the body, it is referred to as a mid-sagittal or median plane, which is identified here. That's when the plane runs directly down the middle or the mid-section of the body. When it's on the right or left plane, it is referred to as the sagittal plane that divides the body or the organ into right or left sides. The median plane also divides the body into right and left sides in equal positions. When it is when it's parasagittal, which is less common, I'm sorry, I'm processing my thought. I feel as though I'm speaking that inappropriately. Let me just continue. Frontal plane is the plane that divides the body or an organ into a front and posterior portion. The frontal plane, which is this pink one, divides the body into a front and rear portion. The midplane divides the body into equal left and right portions. The sagittal plane divides the body into unequal right and left portions. I'm sorry, I just had to process that and get that out. And then finally, our horizontal plane, which is also referred to as the transverse plane, is the plane that divides the body and or organs horizontally into upper and lower portions. Usually transverse planes produce what we refer to as cross sections of images. Okay, here we have some anatomical regions, and within these anatomical regions, we also have surface anatomy terms. So a lot of times we refer to our thumb, our hand, and our forearm in layman terms. But with our anatomical regions or our surface anatomy terms, the thumb would be the pollex, which is here. The hand would be the manual. Our forearm would be antebrachial. Our arm, or the upper arm, would be brachial. So this is a tedious process to become familiar with sternal versus breastbone, mental versus chin. I will provide you with a virtual activity that will assist you in becoming familiar with these terms. Next, we have body cavities. Body cavities are cavities or regions within the body that hold specific components of our anatomy. We have our cranial cavity that composes or holds the brain. We have our vertebral cavity that holds the spinal cord. And then the dorsal body cavity is composed of both the cranial and vertebral cavities. You have your ventral body cavity that is composed of both the thoracic and the abdominal pelvic cavities. The thoracic cavity is also composed of additional cavities. Here you have your superior mediastinum. Here we have our pleural cavities that hold our lungs. Here we have our periocardial cavity, which is connected with the mediastinum, which holds our heart. In between, the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity is the diaphragm. We have our abdominal cavity and our pelvic cavity. The combination of the abdominal and pelvic cavities are referred to as the abdominal pelvic cavity. Again, the thoracic cavity, abdominal cavity, and pelvic cavities are referred to as the ventral body cavity. Next, we have membranes of the body. Naming of the serosus membranes or serosa sorry, lost train of thought. Will be located within the parietal pericardium. So looking at our parietal pericardium, we have a pericardial cavity with serosus fluid. The pericardium is a double-walled sac that contains the heart. The parietal pleural cavities with serosus fluid, visceral pleural, and diaphragm. So here you see that the parietal serosus forms the outer walls of the cavity, and the visceral serosa covers the visceral organs. So parietal coverings are on the outside, visceral coverings are on the inside, specifically around the visceral organ. We've already reviewed body cavities and their locations. Next, we have our abdominal pelvic quadrants. Whenever you're referring to your quadrants, always refer to them as if you're in the anatomical position. You have 4 quadrants. Quad is the prefix for 4. You have 4 quadrants. You have your left upper quadrant, left lower quadrant. Remember, in the anatomical position, your right side is the left side of the specimen or the body. You have your right upper quadrant, right lower quadrant. And in the anatomical position, your left side is the right side of the body or the specimen. And then finally, we have our anatomical body regions. There are 9 anatomical body regions. So more sectioning than the quadrants. And the body regions, you have the right hypochondriac region, the right lumbar region, the right iliac region. On the right-hand side of you, left side of the anatomical body or object, you have the left hypochondriac region, left lumbar region, left iliac region. In the center of your regions, you have the epigastric region, the umbilical region, and the hypogastric region. Some other cavities that we will look at and become more familiar with in this course are oral and digestive cavities, nasal cavity, oral cavity, middle ear cavities, and synovial cavities. Thank you for taking the time to view our presentation. When we meet together, we will be able to discuss some of these topics in more detail.